Hello, and welcome once again to Storytime with Wolf. I am your host and narrator, Wolf with Attitude. As we've been going through the history of the Mafia in the United States, I last left off how the code of conduct and rules were applied to a new made man in the Lucas A. crime family as well as the other four families. So without further ado, the story continues. The two MACK tale. Tony Aceturo's attachment to the Mafia's honor, in his mind, was the gateway to the underworld's fortune and glory. It eventually brought him up to the mob's higher up on the ladder. It turned him into a multimillionaire. However, in his early years, he couldn't find success in any field. One of 6 children, born to immigrant Sicilian parents, Aceturo grew up in the 1940s and 50s in a blue-collar suburban area outside of Newark, New Jersey. His father, Angelo Aceturo, was a butcher, the owner of a meat market. Tried, but was unable to interest the young Tony Aceturo into his legit business. The young boy would rather perfect his talent in pool halls, hustling. He wasn't interested in education. He became a chronic truant after grade 6. His parents wasn't pushing him that much to continue on traditional education, agreeing on him to have an early departure from school when he was 16. When he was barely out of his teen years, the boy was sent to live with relatives in Newark, gaining a reputation for being a scrapper in a street gang that had 50 to 60 young thugs. At 16 years old, his name was enshrined when he branded a crutch to beat up a man to unconsciousness. Through that, he gained the nickname MACK. The name was based on a rugged caveman in the Hollywood movies by Victor McShore. The movie was called 1 Million BC. The name delighted the young Aceturo to the point of honoring the nickname. When Aceturo wasn't scruffing on the streets, he was popping coin boxes from businesses that had jukeboxes and cigarette vending machines, unleashing his own crime wave. While he was disturbing local merchants with these heists, he also disturbed a local big shot named Anthony Delasco. Delasco, who was a former boxer, summoned the young Aceturo for a discipline lecture. Even though Delasco was a big shot, he admired the kid's ambition. Even at a young age, Tony Aceturo knew he was encountering a substantial made man. Delasco in a scolding tone said, "Those machines belong to me. I want this bullshit to stop." Even in a scold tone, he saw potential in the young Aceturo. He even gave the teen a $75 a week job. Back then, $75 a week for a young man was a lot of money. His job descriptions was to assist in running Delasco's numbers, as well as illegal lottery gambling games. Also, used as muscle to collect debts and payments from loan sharking operations. Aceturo signed on, while the older Delasco was teaching him in street mafia lessons. One day, Delasco ordered Tony Aceturo, saying, "Go get me an ice cream," while the young man stood with a group of admiring friends on a street corner. While feeling a bit embarrassed, the young Aceturo knew he would be demeaned in front of his friends if he acted as an errand boy. However, he understood that Delasco was testing his obedience, so he bought his boss the ice cream. "I knew if I wanted to stay with Ham, I had to learn from him. He had to have control over me," Aceturo said in his memoirs decades later. Aceturo became a prize student for Anthony Delasco. Later on also became a prize student for other mafiosi when they replaced Delasco after his death. MACK. Tony Aceturo had one slip up when he was just an associate. It happened when he delivered a package stuffed with cash to Joe Abadi, the capo at the time. It was a body share of proceeds from the Lucas A. Newark branch. He was sitting alone in a parked car, waiting his payoff, eager to introduce himself to Abadi, who he hadn't met. Young Aceturo remarked how honored he was to be in Abadi's presence. Abadi angrily ordered Aceturo out of the car, then sped off. 3 hours later, Aceturo was reprimanded by an older mobster, Lenny Pizzoletta, who Abadi had called. In an angry tone he barked at Aceturo, Who the fuck are you? To start a conversation with your body. Pizzoletta continued. If you want to stay alive, never mention his name. And to speak, only when you are spoken to. With a sudden grin. Except for that single mistake. During the 1950s and 60s, Aseturo was growing smoothly. In the Borgata. He proved himself most of all in the late 60s. When the African American population increased sharply. And black criminals was slowly taking over number games. From white bookies. Bolstered by Aseturo and his hand-picked gang of armed thugs. The Lucase faction held on the stakes. In the numbers games, police intelligence determined that Aseturo smashed any competitor growth in the Lucase domains by a gang of militant Black Panthers. Although no homicide charges were brought forth, the police suspected that Aseturo's unit was responsible for several murders to maintain mafia dominance. In 1979, the 77-year-old Abadi was slowing down and into semi-retirement. That is when Tony Dux Corallo didn't hesitate to have Aseturo becoming his New Jersey capo, promoting MACK over much older soldiers, who earlier has been Aseturo's tutors. Aseturo quickly showed his administrating skills by enlarging the family's gambling, loan sharking, and narcotic trafficking schemes, and entering into labor racketeering, using strong-arm tactics. The New Jersey faction gained control over corrupt union officials. He would use his tactics to threaten work stoppage if unions weren't cooperating, unless payoffs weren't supplied for labor. The new capo expanded operations into Florida, adopting new criminal adventures in the Miami area, as well as fixing horse races in Florida. He became so successful that he and a partner was able to become legit businessmen in selling insurance and in real estate throughout New Jersey, Florida, and in North Carolina. He himself maintained a home in each of the 3 states. He was planning to retire in North Carolina, where he posed as a respectful businessman. The riches were flowing in for Aseturo, but he still remained in the shadows, a hidden mafioso. His name was mostly known to law enforcement experts in New Jersey. When there was trouble with the law, MACK had the means of getting himself top-of-the-line defense lawyers to either get him suspended sentences or at best, jail term of a few months for a major crime. He also had the means to bribe jurors to win him acquittals for himself and his crew, who were charged on racketeering charges. On another case, he had his lawyers to dismiss charges against him in Florida by finding paid psychiatrists that would classify Aseturo mentally unfit to stand trial. By diagnosing him with pre-dementia, it was a total fraud. He would chuckle to his people, "I slipped and banged my head in the shower, and the dementia went away," as he told friends. For almost 4 decades, the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, was in assorted deals, violence and murder, was the world that Aseturo adopted and cherished. He considered being a mafiosi was bigger than being the Pope. It was so big that he introduced his son into the Borgata. He always had locked in his mind the day he held the burning saint in his hand, swearing total loyalty and brotherhood in the Borgata. Even before his induction, he knew the one thing never to do was to violate Omerta, the code of silence. The penalty for informing was usually a bullet in the back of the head. Aseturo never doubted that such executions was deserved. But, after a lifetime of loyalty to MACK, a known capo in the Lucase family, the definition of mafia success, renounced Omerta, the code of silence he lived by. He became a traitor to prosecutors and investigators. He opened up to investigators years of criminal operations. His words to prosecutors exposed several mobsters who once followed him as their trusted commander. He opened up everything to law enforcement about La Cosa Nostra and the Omerta that shielded Aseturo for decades to self-appointed men of honor. And with that being said, I now close out this episode of Storytime with Wolf. In this episode, I just brought factual light on how a once-made man became a government rat to save his own ass. As I said, this has been Storytime with Wolf. I am your host and narrator Wolf with Attitude. And this episode is the continue of the history of the Mafia in America. Join me again for another episode on history of the Mafia and a lot of other amazing stories. Questa episodio. EQ so. This episode is closed. So, as always, peace out, mofos.
My house, my rule. Welcome then.